Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse, alongside, as always, my good friend, Mr. Martin Popoff. What's
Yes.
happening,
Morning,
Martin?
sir. Morning, sir. We've got a good one, a contentious one today, I think, on
Possibly.
this chilly winter day here in Toronto.
Really? Oh,
Kinda.
we've got the first
Yeah.
bit of sunshine in a morning in like a week and a half today here in the Hudson
Brutal.
Valley. And I think it's going to be 60 degrees.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Spring. It's amazing. We've had like nonstop rain or like black cloudy days and like 55 degrees or less, like
Yeah.
since we had those two 90-degree days like 3 weeks ago. So it's like now I think spring, based on the weather report, looks like spring is finally going to be here. We should see 60s and low 70s all of next week. So I'm excited because I'm ready. I'm
I
ready.
suppose it is spring because the Leafs are letting us down. So yeah,
That's to be
two
expected.
nothing to Florida now. Man. Yeah, brutal. So
So Martin and I have a really interesting show for you here today, which I think this topic has kind of percolated with us for a long time. And then Martin sent me some ideas for future shows a couple of weeks ago, and this was one of them. It's like, yeah, we never really got around to that. So we've talked a bit on and off on this show and on various other shows on the channel about this whole idea of Southern rock. What constitutes Southern rock? And do you have to be from the South? There's light Southern rock bands that are more on the countryside. There's heavier Southern rock bands that some border on metal. And what about these bands that are not from the South, but have and carry over a lot of the elements that the Southern rock bands do, right? Whether they're, and they could they be from another country? Can you play like Southern fried music when you're a European band, if you're a Canadian band, if you're a band from California, right? And then really the basis for this episode is kind of, we're calling it Southern fried metal. What the hell is Southern fried metal? And so we're going to talk about here today some bands who are not from the South, who play a style of music that could be considered Southern rock. We're going to talk about some bands that are from the South, but their music isn't really rock, it's more metal. Does that kind of count? And some other bands that maybe would never can be considered Southern fried anything, A, because they're not from the South, and B, because we classify them as something else. But when you really listen to their music, you hear a lot of elements that we find in Southern rock or Southern fried metal. So this may sound all confusing and whatnot. And I do want to preface this. We're probably going to talk about some artists today that are somewhat controversial. I'll just preface it with saying we're here to talk about their music. So keep all that other stuff somewhere else. And with all that being said, I will turn it over to Martin to kickstart the conversation, add a little commentary there.
yeah, there definitely are a few landmines. So we'll try to stay away from the landmines. But yeah, so what I like about this idea. So I've actually over time, and I do have a podcast, one of my audio history in 5 songs episodes on Southern, not from the South or something like that. So very specifically on one part of this. But I like the idea that this is Southern fried metal. And I think there are some other concepts that will come out. Like where did this come from? And again, I think my favorite part of this whole thing is this concept of bands who sound like they're Southern rock, but they aren't from the South. But again, this is a little more metal, so we're going to talk about some of these other ones. But it came up again in the little email group I've got with Monty Connor and the guys that I swear to God, the most Southern rock album of all time that's not from the South is that first Bachman Turner Overdrive album. That I just play that thing start to finish. It's like I said in the email. It's like the lyrics, the name of the band, the cogs, the belt buckles, the nudie suits, the hats, the weight on them, all the music, like it's very Southern. And another interesting one we did on the Contrarians was I did these 2 episodes of I built a UK glam album out of the Alice Cooper catalog, and I built a Blue Oyster Cult album out of the. Remember we talked a little bit about that with Alice Cooper, right? So I could almost do an episode. I probably should get to it, but I'm blown away by how you can play songs off the first 2 Pat Travers albums, and you can make a Foghat album. They just literally sound like like he sounds like Dave Peverett singing, even, right?
Yeah.
And then the songs, like it's dead identical to those early Foghat albums, right?
And the Foghat stuff is, and we've talked about this before. You listen to a Foghat album, if you knew nothing about Foghat,
yeah,
nothing at all, and someone played, any of those classic albums, would you at all think that they were British? Wouldn't you think? I mean, these guys are probably from Georgia or Florida. Listen to all those wailing slide guitars and the attitude and the raunch on the vocals. I mean, it sounds like a Southern rock band, right? How much different does Foghat sound than, like, say, Lynyrd Skynyrd or early Blackfoot or Molly Hatchet? It's not that far removed, right?
Yeah. And this is part of that whole thing where a large chunk of being a Southern rock band is celebrating the British blues boom.
100%.
So you're coming from that. But we're steering a little away from that this time, because always in the back of my head I'm thinking, have we had shows similar where we've talked about this stuff? So we've kind of steered this a little bit to more of a wider thing. So I'll start in with my first choice. My first choice is a band that I think kind of starts a little bit of this. I think they're kind of like the history of Southern fried metal. And it's not Blackfoot, it's actually Ted Nugent. And I've taken out my Ted Nugent CDs just to show that he's sort of like this even now, right? So, obviously, there's the things we won't necessarily get into, like the heavy duty right-wing politics and all that, but there's also the nature and the hunting, and you think of great white buffalo and hibernation and the links. Ted will be the first to tell you about his roots, and he'll start rattling off all those 50s rock and roll guys, right? So you definitely have, he's not a blues artist, and he never was, right. But he's definitely a rock and roll lover, right?
Like Chuck Berry and whatnot. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you really hear that in his soloing style. I really love the way that Ted's guitar playing, he really does have a distinct style, and it's really kind of it's a subtle thing that you got to listen to a lot of his solos to put it together. It's a little bit like a Buck Dharma situation where he's really musical and lyrical with what he's doing, and there's really these links to the roots. But I'm showing you this newer stuff, but I actually pulled this one out because this one's really southerny. It's not very good, but it's also one where he's getting a little more away from the good riffs sort of thing. But of course, the whole early history, forget about early Amboy Dukes, include later Amboy Dukes, include Call of the Wild and Tooth, Fang and Claw, but include all that 70s stuff. And you kind of got a guy that I feel like is the grandfather of this pile of CDs I'm looking at over here, where he's almost like he's the perfect example of the guy that is at the metal end of Southern rock, and he's not from the South, right? He's kind of a Detroit, Texas nexus kind of guy, right? These days, anyways. So yeah, I think definitely Ted fits this whole thing. There's a lot of parts of the package that add up to him being a Southern rock guy, not from the South, and the grandfather of Southern fried metal.
Yeah, and if I recall, and again, this is probably going back 2-3 years, you and I ranked the albums of Ted Nugent, and I think one or the both of us kind of, if I remember correctly, we were talking about Weekend Warriors and State of Shock, and we both remarked it's like, yeah, these are kind of like his heavy duty Southern rock records. I mean, you listen to those songs and the vocals, the arrangements, the guitar soloing, there's just this kind of almost rootsiness to it that's pretty different from like the first 3 more riffy albums and what. But even like on Cat Scratch Fever, there's a lot of that stuff on there as well, right? It's just and again, maybe because I know Ted has an affinity for not only the American classic rock and roll artists, but he also loves the British bands as well. So maybe it's kind of a little of both. I don't know. I think it's more of a mentality than anything else, but it really comes through in the music. So
yeah, and Derek St. Holmes with that whole soulful ethic, Motown, Detroit kind of guy ethic, right? So the Motown thing obviously has its roots to the blues and R&B and all that. So the South is all mixed up in that too.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to dive right in. So the bands I'm going to talk about today there's 2 camps. So there's one, they are from the South. They definitely play metal or a subgenre of heavier music, but they totally sound Southern. And then I have others that are not from the South at all and generally are never considered what we're talking about here, but I think there are similarities there. So the first band is Down. Of course, their classic first album, NOLA, is a stoner rock or stoner metal classic, right? But again, if you go and look up information on Down on the internet, like if you go to their Wikipedia page, right, they list them as stoner rock, stoner metal, psychedelic rock, and then southern rock, right? They always try to throw that in there. And do they do that because they're from the South, or do they do that because there are similarities here? I would argue both. So I went and like revisit a lot of this stuff, even though I've heard these albums a million times. And like I was listening to Stone the Crows just a little while before we started taping, and I'm like, the little jangly guitars in the beginning, right? The way that Phil is singing. And again, this is, these are guys, Phil, obviously from Pantera, you got the guys from Crowbar and Corrosion of Conformity and whatnot. So it's this interesting meeting of these musicians who have deep roots in the South anyway, but the music has this kind of bluesy Southern drawl to it. It's kind of psychedelic, but there's jangly guitars. There's at times big riffs. And I keep going back to Stone the Crows. If Lynyrd Skynyrd ever decided to get really heavy, it's Down to me, minus the slide guitars. And I think throughout, I think there's even more Southern stuff going on this album. This is definitely, stoner metal. This to me is much, much closer to what we consider Southern rock. And then the third album, they've had a couple EPs since then, but there's some really, really good instrumentation on these albums, and just this whole roots feel, even though this is very heavy, very chunky, stoner metal doomy type of stuff. So I think it totally qualifies. I think for me anyway, Southern Fried Metal, there's a couple poster children for that term. This is one of them, and the band I'm going to talk about next is the other one. So turn it back.
Yeah, and you've got that New Orleans Texas nexus as well. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Phil singing, because he does sound like a big barrel-chested Fred Turner, Dusty Hill.
I was just gonna say,
yeah. He does have kind of a drawl, and even the Pantera guys had a bit of a Southern drawl to them, right? Pepper is a total Southern kind of guy, right? So yeah, the whole Crowbar thing, Soylent Green, all those bands all mixed together down there. And they called it NOLA, and now they literally almost put a label on a subgenre of that stuff, that whole NOLA metal scene.
And there's so many of them. It's like it's not one of my picks, but like Goat Whore, who are kind of like a black metal band, like a Southern Fried black metal band. And there's a lot of these similar characteristics in the music of Goat Whore. And again, they're another NOLA band, right? There's all these New Orleans bands that do all this kind of like southerny metal, extreme metal, sludge type of thing, right? And it's all has its roots in a lot of the same places.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've got one that fits perfectly right in with all this. Where is it here? So little known band, Agony Column, right? So this was classified as Texas hellbilly music, right? And it's kind of thrashy and loose recorded, but it really has that swampy kind of vibe to them. This one's called God, Guns, and Guts, right? So, and then you get onto the next one, and we've got Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, which the the magazine got named after, right? And then you've got I guess that's a Texas flag. It says Dixie. You've got a Confederate flag on there. The Confederate flag.
Other than that, right?
that literally used to be, one of the big symbols of a Southern rock band, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a big Skynyrd thing, right? But Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, baseball bats on that. And then you've got Way Back in the Woods. This one's super rare. I mean, it's actually got gold embossing and stuff. And look at that back cover. Like, what's more, well, it's kind of country western, right, as well. So country western fits into this as well. So yeah, as you go west, you get bands that you could put into the whole Southern rock thing. You and I have talked about how Little Feat, had they been, plunked right into Jacksonville, Florida, they would have been a Southern rock band, right?
Oh, for sure.
But this band is very cool. Always loved them. Stuart Lawrence, Bat Lord, aka Bat Lord, went on to Igniter, sent me up a big pile of stuff, a bunch of really cool Agony column things. But yeah, the whole history of why the magazine is called this is a little bit convoluted. I think maybe even Drew Masters from Meat had something to do with how that name came up. But yeah, everybody finds that funny that hey, wow, Brave Words and Blade Knuckles, pretty wild. But yeah, really cool band, super obscure, pretty hard to get these all now. People don't really talk about them much anymore, but it's the perfect mix in there with that whole ZZ Top debate and Texas and the South and everything.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things we haven't even mentioned so far is most of these bands from the South, whether they're playing heavier music or normal Southern rock, a lot of their songs, lyrically speaking, have a lot to do with things that go on from where they came from, right? So, I mean, I was just thinking about like so many of these down songs, Go So Long to Mississippi, and there's all sorts of songs that have to do with where they live down in the South, whether they be from Texas or Louisiana or Florida or Georgia or whatever. And that is a characteristic too. And, you mentioned the flags and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting with the baseball bats, and well, it's all rifles and it's just this whole Southern way of living.
I got more of that coming. Yeah. Some of these. Yeah.
All right. My other 1-2 punch from definitely a Southern fried metal band who, early on, they've always been called one of the great crossover bands in heavy music history, and originally started out as kind of like a crossover hardcore thrash band. And then they just kind of morphed into this kind of stoner, doomy, Southern fried, whatever you want to call them. And that's Corrosion of Conformity. And I think that style really started permeating their music when Pepper Keenan came into the band, and he started singing for the band, and he's got that kind of Southern drawl thing going on. And Deliverance was a kind of like a fairly decent hit for them, and they have the song Albatross on here, which again, you listen to Albatross again. I listened to it this morning. I was going through this album, and I was like, man, if you close your eyes, and maybe you've never listened to these guys before, if you close your eyes and you listen to Albatross for the very first time, you would think it's a Skynyrd song, because Pepper sounds a lot like either Johnny or Ronnie, and you got those kind of jangly guitars and the big riffs and lots of solos, and it's got this kind of, I don't know, groovy, grimy kind of thing going on. And throughout this whole album, you got this album too, and then all of a sudden now Corrosion of Conformity, instead of being kind of classified as this kind of thrash hardcore hybrid, now all of a sudden they're like a Southern fried stoner metal band, right? And along with Down, and again, you got members kind of crisscrossed into these bands. Crowbar's another one as well. Again, I'll probably be talking about these bands at length in future All About the Fuzz episodes, but because they are from the South and they have that feel, it's permeating everything they do. Again, you look at the songs, there's all sorts of stuff about the South and whatnot. Total fit. And when you really think about it, we mentioned Blackfoot before, is the music of some of these bands all that much different than a band like Blackfoot, who have always just been called, one of the heavier of the Southern rock bands, right? Is this all that much different? It's just much more modern, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I pulled some of this stuff from your list too, so I'll flash some of these as well. So yeah, there we've got. This is the one with the contentious drum sound that nobody liked. This had a bad sort of experimental drum sound, and here they are much more.
Oh yeah.
This is really stony and swampy, right?
Oh yeah.
And then there's some of their early stuff there, right? This is when they were more punky and hardcore,
yep.
Right? And then Blind was a bit of a hit for them as well, right?
Yes, yeah.
This is a big deal, right? Yeah, I love these guys. And then I can't remember which album it was, but you hear about them recording in a big old house in the attic and all that sort of stuff. Like all the, all the atmosphere is there with these guys for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So my next choice, just again, fitting so along with all of this stuff, Nashville Pussy, which I still play these guys a lot while out jogging around and stuff. It's good jogging music because it's up tempo, right? They're kind of there's the really cool one that's the redo of the Nazareth album cover, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then we've got Get Some, and it brings up the whole Blaine and Reuters, the whole born in a trailer park kind of thing, right? I think of Trailer Park Boys and Ricky and Bubbles and all that when I think of these guys, right? From Hell to Texas. So yeah, this again is a band that so it's cool. They got the cowboy hats, but this is the lyrics. It's kind of comedic, right? So it's a little bit of that real sort of hillbilly comedy sort of thing about and it's all about drinking, right? Drinking and drugs and sex and everything, right? And musically wise, these guys are sort of like definitely very, very Southern roots rocky, but a little bit sped up. So there's a little bit of punk to it, a little bit of Motorhead to it, right? It's very straight, pretty simplistic in most cases. Kind of a funny band in that they actually, this is actually on purpose, but they have some productions that have kind of trashy drum sounds, and I'm not very crazy about them. I can't remember. Let me just see here which. Yeah, so I would say this is one of the better produced ones. It's got great songs on here, like Stone Cold Down, I really like a lot. Get Some's got some classic on it as well. Their cover of Nutbush City Limits, that's such a Southern rock song, right? Just the lyrics and everything about it, even though it's not really a Southern rock song. Atlanta's Still Burning. Meaner Than My Mama is a hilarious one as well. So yeah, if we're ever gonna do that episode about comedy and music and does it work and stuff, this is a band you could really talk about. Like, and look at these back album covers, right? So yeah, the duality and then over on the second female position in the band, that's changed throughout, sort of thing. But it's been Blaine and Reuters bands, Jeremy's band, I guess, for most of the time. But yeah, they're still going and just really good stuff that definitely feels like. And of course, the name of the band is from a rap from the Ted Nugent Double Live Gonzo album as well. So yeah, good cross between basically they sound like an underground indie version of Ted Nugent, right?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. And it's funny you mentioned the whole comedy in music, because I've actually been asked multiple times by different people over the last couple of weeks for us to do something on bands and artists who inject comedy into their music. And I was like, And it's funny because when you just real quick stop to think about it, it's almost like your mind draws a blank. But then you started mentioning Nashville Pussy. Well, there's one right there. There's Frank Zappa. There's probably a lot more than we even realize. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. But yeah. All right. So a band artist not from the South who has kind of adopted a Southern mentality. Zakk Wylde. All right. So a guy from New Jersey who grew up loving bands like the Allman Brothers and Lynyrd Skynyrd and Black Sabbath and Ozzy, finds himself becoming the guitar player in Ozzy's band, then does this little-known album called Pride and Glory, which is essentially a Southern rock album, puts together a band called Black Label Society, which, again, not a Southern band. He formed it with other folks from California, so they kind of list themselves as from California, even though he's from New Jersey. And basically, Black Label Society, again, similar to Corrosion, similar to Down, more of kind of like a stoner rock or stoner metal band. But man, his vocals, he sounds like he grew up in Florida. I mean, he's got the drawl thing down. So it's really weird. It's like Zakk combines like the mentality of the Allmans and Skynyrd and Blackfoot and Hatchet with this big upbringing of Black Sabbath riffs and crazy soloing and whatnot. And yeah, you got all these albums. I didn't pull out the Pride and Glory album, which is the total Southern rock album.
Got a few here as well.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
List, yeah. It's bad album covers, eh?
Yeah, they're not great.
Kind of cool, yeah.
They're not great. I think here he's totally going for the whole Southern thing because we know how Southern folk love their whiskey and their booze and whatnot, right? But yeah, just a really interesting Southern rock mentality, but put in a framework that could be labeled, some people call BLS doom, some people call them stoner metal, whatever. But there's a really, really kind of gutsy, kind of raunchy feel to a lot of the songs and arrangements that is not uncommon with what we see in regular Southern rock bands.
Yeah, and you mentioned the riffing. The riffing you could say is perfectly also in tune with COC and definitely Pantera. And
Oh yeah,
he was buddies with them, and he's a perfect
exactly.
fit in the current version of Pantera.
Yep.
But yeah, you listen to a lot of this Black Label stuff. The funny thing about Black Label is I always can't. I'm always distracted by. There's sort of like an indie feel to it. Like it doesn't sound like they're particularly well recorded, or I don't know, something about it doesn't feel as stadium rock as all the Pantera albums, put it that way. But I can listen to the riffs and I can go, well, that
Riffs are
would have
great.
been a perfect Pantera riff, right?
Yeah. And he's got this weird thing, like on every album, he's got to put like one or two like piano led ballads where he's just crooning away. And granted, they're well done, but to me, they always seem to kind of derail the momentum of a lot of these albums, because like just when you're like, you get like two or three bangers and then all of a sudden, oh, there's the piano song, like whatever. And I've seen them live many times, and especially after Dime died, he wanted to do more of that type of thing, because I guess he was trying to deal with his grief through songs like that, and it didn't really work live. But yeah, I mean, I like a lot of the Black Label albums. I sometimes feel like a lot of them are kind of patchy. That if you take like the best songs of every Black Label Society album, you have one of the most kick-ass triple albums in the history of heavy music, right? Because he writes great riffs. The solos are amazing. He's got that vocal style, which is kind of like this Ozzy meets Greg Allman type of thing. It's very, very strange, but it works. But yeah, total Southern mentality, even though nothing.
Yeah, it's weird. I can't get out of my head this thing when I listen, because I listen to this stuff pretty regularly, and it feels like there's this strange separation. There's this void between the rhythm section and the guitars. It's something. It's not like melded together. There's no like bleed between them or something. There's kind of a dry, claustrophobic feel between them. So I'm like, the guitars are over here, the bass and drums are over here, the vocals are over here, and I'm feeling this space between them, like they're not connecting in some strange way. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's because there's at times a little lack of groove in some of these songs? Because I think most of the great BLS stuff is just they're launching pads for terrific riffs and solos, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, these songs that are just completely locked in. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. The grooves, yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe the grooves are kind of missing there, right? Maybe it's a little metronomic, right?
Because he obviously is a massive fan of Sabbath and Tony Iommi, right? So could you say like Master of Reality, Paranoid, Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, are there any shortage of grooves on those albums? Mm-hmm. I'd argue not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You listen to like an album like Master of Reality, which obviously he's a huge fan of. I mean, there's tremendous groove on all those songs. Yeah. Right? You would never question that in a million years. But yeah, you listen to some of the Black Label Society stuff, it kind of can sound a little cold and clinical at times. Yeah. And are we just listening to these songs for those riffs? Is there anything beyond that? Hard to say sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so my next choice is let's go with this one. Not sure how this lines up in time here, but American Dogs. So Columbus, Ohio, Michael Hannon, good buddy of mine. I mean, this band live are incredible. They're a power trio. There's Michael, Steve Theto in the middle, Keith Pickens, amazing rhythm section between. Michael's like he loves his Motorhead. He's a bass playing lead singer in this band. Amazing grooves, great production. This is the one that kicked it all off. They even came to Toronto with this, but I mean, I've got piles of them here. Scars and Bars. And again, so they've got the American thing going, the dog thing going. Most of the songs are about booze, and to be a little politically correct, they're about booze and then driving drunk at the same time. There's a lot of that going on in these songs as well, right? You've got, here we go, Poison Smile, Foaming at the Mouth Live, Mean. It's a single, We Ain't Gonna Not Get Drunk Tonight. Yeah,
they're gonna try anyway.
Yeah. Unfinished Business, great album cover on that one. And then this is your perfect sort of because Ohio's kind of like, like what they say about Florida: the farther you go north, the more south it gets, right? And
Yeah.
Ohio's kind of like the American version of that, right? That's the Ohio's like a southern rock state, right? And it all kind of starts with the Gods, right? Eric Moore and the Gods, that whole biker metal thing, and
Yep, exactly.
that was very roots rocky, and it had a real 50s vibe to a lot of it, right? Kind of rubbed us the wrong way. We all wished it would have been heavier, right? Remember that first album's on Millennium Casablanca?
Yep.
But yeah, Eric Moore's like the godfather of all this stuff up there, right? So American Dog, you could almost say are like, the offspring of the Gods. But you look at this one, so you've got the American flag, which, again, there's a lot of debate that the American flag has been taken over as a right-wing symbol, right? So forget the Confederate flag. It's like the American flag. There's a lot of debate. You stick that on your album cover, and people look at it funny, right? But the neat thing about this one is the title: Red, White, Black, and Blue, right? Like, what a great album title, right? And you've got the guns on there. But yeah, you've got the six pack. So yeah, a lot of boozing songs, that's for sure, and hard. But man, the quality across these albums, like it is, they're all so well recorded, just well played, put together. Steve's solos are insane. The lyrics are great. The lyrics are funny. Michael talks about this band the same way we talk about Nashville Pussy, like they're a cross between, Motorhead and Ted Nugent. Michael loves Ted Nugent. He loves Motorhead. He loves Alice Cooper. There's no Alice Cooper in their sound, but they definitely sound like almost like an exact cross between Motorhead and Ted Nugent. But I would say closer to Ted Nugent. And I'd throw some Blackfoot in there as well. Some like true Southern fried metal in there as well. But yeah, see these guys, just play these records just to listen for Steve's guitar solos. They are so musical and so traditional at the same time. They themselves are like a great, they're like the greatest Ted Nugent guitar solos you could ever imagine, right? So yeah, very prolific band, put out a lot of stuff, and just like a Columbus, Ohio institution.
I wonder how familiar Jamie Laszlo is with that band, being from Ohio as well.
I don't know if I've ever talked to Jamie about America.
Yeah, I don't know. Martin, what year is their album Last of the Dying Breed?
Last of the Dying Breed is the first one. I think it's about 2000. And that's when they came up to Toronto. And it's good. It's got the Twisted Sister cover on it, like right out of the gates. And I must mention as well, like, Michael Hannon comes from Salty Dog, right? And Salty Dog is another band that totally fits in this. They had that one album, and it's completely like a Southern rock, Zeppelin-y, but in the hair metal era thing. So that was like a major label signing and stuff. And then that thing crashed in flames. That band had some drug problems, and so Michael's back with American Dog with all of this stuff.
Yeah, the reason I asked, because Skinner, of course, released Last of the Dying Breed in 2012. So I was kind of wanting to see like who came out with
right. Forgot about that. Yeah. So yeah, if I look at it here, yeah, 2000. It's
okay, 2000. Well, they had him beat.
Outlaw Entertainment. That's right. So this was Outlaw Entertainment, I think, was a Vancouver situation. And then a lot of their albums came out on a French label, and then they had American versions of it as well. But yeah, so many of these songs are just yeah. So I'm looking on the back of one of the EF on one of the EPs. We've got DNF, Drinking About You, Too Damn Sober, Just an Alcoholic, Drank Too Much, and I'll Drink to That. So they stuck a bunch of them together on the six pack album, right? And you've got the the picture of the actual six pack there. So yeah, great, amazing band. They should have been bigger, and all the years, I've talked to Michael, like these guys should have been on tours with Black Label Society, Nashville Pussy. They didn't get on a lot of big national tours. That's kind of they went to Europe a lot, which is kind of bizarre. That's another thing to mention, is that the French love Southern rock. In France, Southern rock's a big thing. And I even remember in the Kerrang days, it's all that whole grass is greener thing. Like in Europe, there's nothing more American than Southern rock, right? So they love the whole mystique of this thing way far away, and all these American things about Southern rock. So you would see all of those bands getting a lot of column inches in Kerrang all the time, all the Southern rock bands.
Yeah, Germany too is big into Southern rock. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think they're called Southern Records. If I remember correctly, there's this record label out of Germany, that all they do is promote American Southern rock bands and the underground Southern rock bands and actual bands from Europe who play Southern rock style. And you go onto their website, you can find all sorts of rarities and interesting things. It's really, really interesting that like Europeans have this love of this music that is so very American and so, centered on a specific place here in the States, right?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here, I'm trying to stay focused. One of my dogs has horrible gas, and I'm sitting here, I'm getting dizzy. I'm like, my God, it's like, whoo, Jesus. Anyway, all right. So my next one here, in fact, my next two are kind of a stretch, but hang in with me, folks, because I think there are some similarities here that kind of make a little bit of sense. So I'm going to go to California to a band who debuted in the mid 80s and I think always unfairly got kind of lumped in with the whole hair metal thing. I don't really, other than the fact that they came out when they came out, I don't think they ever really fully belonged there. And to me, their music has always been really good metallic kind of blues rock, but there's a lot of similarities to Southern rock in the music of Tesla. So from, their debut album, for me, their first three albums are just absolutely classic records.
Too, yeah.
And, Martin, I don't know whether it's the combination of the vocal style, because he's got this kind of like raunchy, kind of very expressive way of singing, the way they dressed. I mean, they were not all about, dressing up in the hair and all that kind of stuff. They wore jeans and t-shirts and, they just looked like regular guys. They had this kind of like biker look to them for a while. The twin guitars, slide guitar, just lyrics that have to do with more common type themes. And, songs like, What You Want, Getting Better, Little Susie. I mean, you can go through all of these albums and pick out The Way It Is. I mean, there is a feel to a lot of these songs. Again, they're very bluesy. To me, Tesla always sounded like not that much different, maybe a heavier version of like the Black Crowes. God, I didn't even think about doing the Black Crowes for this episode, right? But like an extent, kind of like, and they predated the Crowes by a couple of years, but a more metallic version of what the Black Crowes were doing, and maybe a little less kind of jammy and less stonesy. But man, you listen to Tesla and it's just like, holy cow, they're really not all that much different than some of these bands, and completely different than some of the other bands that they got kind of lumped in with and compared to, like Poison and Motley Crue and White Lion and so on and so forth. So I think if you're watching this episode and you're kind of maybe intrigued about where we're coming from, go and listen to some of these Tesla songs and let me know if you think you hear some of that rootsiness in their playing, that kind of mentality from the vocal perspective, the way the guitars are laid out, the arrangements. I mean, it's very much in the style of what we're kind of getting to here. Martin, I don't know if you have anything to add about Tesla.
Yeah, totally agree. And they're from Sacramento, right? So they're from up north. But the funny thing with, I guess, California is you get more Southern as you go east, right? So as you get away from the coast, you think of Bakersfield and all that, right? But yeah, they absolutely. And also, I did a history in 5 songs with Martin Popoff audio thing. I think I did one on this whole idea of bluesy hair metal or dirty hair metal. Both bluesy hair metal, and you and I have talked about this as well. Bluesy hair metal and dirty hair metal are both leaning into that whole Southern thing. So Tesla's kind of arriving late. They're really good right out of the gates. They have a long past before they become Tesla, right? But they arrive with this really cool thing about them, this roots metal working man thing. There's a little Bruce Springsteen and John Mellencamp to them, I suppose. If you think of their worldview or whatever, right? And Jeff Keith is also kind of like a kind of a scatterbrain hippie kind of guy as well at the same time, right? But he's very soulful and it's all about the music and all that. Frank Hannon as well, with the whole the Allman Brothers sort of connection and his hippie trippy, actually kind of a Grateful Dead thing that he does a little bit, right? A little bit of his philosophy, but yeah, absolutely.
Does if you play slide guitar in your band, do you automatically qualify for this? No, of course not. But like every time you hear a slide guitar, that sounds like Southern rock, right? And that's just This goes to show, because slide guitar was back, the American bluesmen way back when were incorporating bottleneck slide and, acoustic and electric blues. But the Southern rock bands kind of took that as that's our, Prague has the mellotron, Southern rock has the slide, right? It's kind of how it works. So,
and then just to confound you, Tesla throws in the vintage Def Leppard sound into them, which is the least Southern rock band of all time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, my last choice is Four Horsemen. So this also qualifies as similar to the Tesla situation. So the first album is produced by Rick Rubin. So they're a California situation. They only make the 2 albums. So they make this album, Frank Starr, the lead singer of the band, although it's Haggis's band. So Haggis, he was like, he came from Zodiac Mind Warp, and he was like a bassist for the Cult or whatever. And he's kind of writing everything. But so you got Frank Starr. And then, as I understand it, Frank Starr, he ends up in jail for like 6 months or something, which causes some problems in the band on drug charges. And then he ends up in jail again for a year, which causes even more problems. Their drummer dies of a drug overdose. So as time goes on, they're working on this album that comes out in 96, but they're started in 94. And fortunately, Frank Starr is on it. But then Frank Starr, he's on his motorbike and he gets hit by a drunk driver. He goes into a coma for years. He never comes out of the coma. He dies, I think, in 1999. But fortunately, we have the great, amazing voice of Frank Starr on these 2 albums, which are very similar to each other, even though the lineups are quite different. A few guys are missing here, sort of thing. But again, very old-timey Western North Dakota, back cover on that. The second one isn't produced by Rick Rubin. It's actually Tom Tremuth, and it's on Magnetic Air, and it's made in like Toronto or something. But it sounds exactly like the first one. Great, amazing recordings on these. This sounds like a little bit of a cross between AC/DC and Ted Nugent, or AC/DC and Blackfoot, something like that, where it's kind of smoothed out and straight. They go for kind of a simplistic vibe on a lot of the songs, but the second one's got a cover of Still Alive and Well, and what a great title. Getting Pretty Good at Barely Getting By. And the first one's called Nobody Said It Was Easy, right? And then they later on had another album, but it's sort of like old recordings, but called Daylight Again in 2009, which sounds very much like these. Unfortunately, it's not Frank Starr singing on them. Ron Young from Little Caesar was in the band a little bit as well. But yeah, these are absolutely 2 drop dead classics of Southern fried metal. Again, very much in the Tesla vein, Badlands, Salty Dog sort of thing. Really, really good albums, super recordings. And even with all the trauma that's going on with this one and getting made, in Canada, it's like, it still sounds like a perfect, beautifully, beautifully high fidelity, just like the first one. So there you go. The Four Horsemen.
Yeah, you're talking about the accident, right? And you're thinking, oh God, Dwayne Allman and Barry Oakley, right? It's what's the deal with all similar type things, right? And you mentioned Still Alive and Well. How about Johnny Winter, the Johnny Winter and band, right? I mean, with Derringer, and that stuff is kind of like,
oh yeah,
Southern Rocky too, right? Kind of
even the first Derringer album and even the earlier Rick Derringer albums, right?
Yeah,
and somewhat, even Sweet Evil, although you're moving into more of an Aerosmithy sort of sound.
Yeah, for sure.
Great album, but yeah, definitely a lot of Southern rock and Rick Derringer.
Yeah. All right, my last pick for today is a band from Pennsylvania. They're from the Philly area. Not a place known for it being a hotbed of Southern rock, although I have relatives who live out further in Pennsylvania. And that's like being in the South, I got to tell you. But these guys are a little bit more from the city area. But Cinderella, all right? So, of course, no one would ever accuse Cinderella of being kind of Southern fried anything with their first album, Night Songs, which is very much, solid, bluesy hair metal, right? Kind of bluesy rock. You got Tom Kiefer's kind of like Brian Johnson roar on the vocals. But Martin, pull that CD back again. So Heartbreak Station. Now, tell me they don't look like a bunch of Southern rock guys on there. And
Yeah.
it's funny because after that debut album, Long Cold Winter and Heartbreak Station, and even the fourth album, Still Climbing, there's lots of Southern rock tropes going on in these albums.
What's more Southern than some train tracks, right?
Absolutely, 100%, absolutely, right. And yeah, hanging out in the front stoop, right? It's just it's so Southern sounding. And Tom, again, he's a blues guy, and there's slide guitars all over these albums. There's lots of bluesy licks. There's a raunchy, rootsy kind of I almost threw out a term we said we weren't going to use in this episode, Martin, so I won't do it. But but yeah, there is a mentality, I think, throughout a lot of this Cinderella catalog post the first album that I think is very, very Southern sounding. And if you've listened to any of Tom's solo stuff since Cinderella kind of got put by the wayside, where his roots are. And I listened to the Cinderella catalog, and again, if you can get past the look, right, from the first album, I don't see a hair metal band here, really. If it wasn't for the MTV videos and some of those early like hit singles, this is a Southern fried hard rock band to me, in my mind, even though they're not from the South at all. And again, I think with a lot of these bands who are not from the South, who we're kind of talking about in this episode, maybe it doesn't matter where you're from. Maybe you don't have to be from Georgia or from Florida or New Orleans to appreciate just having this mentality of singing about stuff that you love, that's important to you, whether you lived in Pennsylvania, New York, or California, and using the blues and maybe a little country as the backbone to what you're doing. And I think if obviously we know how big bands like Skynyrd and Hatchet and the Outlaws and whatnot have been, and if guys like you or me are into and influenced by bands like that, why can't some of these guys like Tom Kiefer or any of the guys from Tesla or, whoever, Jakey Lee, whatever, if they're fans too, why can't they be influenced by that style of music in those bands and have that infiltrate their music, even though they aren't from the South?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you think of, and then another common route or something that's on the way from the blues boom to Cinderella is Aerosmith, right? So you could put together, the Aerosmith has a lot of songs that you could call pretty Southern rocking, right? Even though, it's Rolling, the updated Rolling Stones or the heavy metal Rolling Stones or whatever. But, you even think of, all those horrible Aerosmith ballads we hate from later years. Half of those sound like Southern rock ballads, right?
Yeah.
They're not particularly hair metal ballady. They're more like a Southern rock ballad, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they start off, you have the acoustic guitars and the big chorus and sometimes a nice slow build to the end where it picks up the pace a little bit. Yeah, I mean, for sure. Yeah.
And we didn't talk about Clutch this time, but I think we've talked about Clutch before and how they fit this whole Southern rock thing in so many ways, right? The lyrics, the storytelling, right? The out in the woods stuff going on all the time, right?
Yeah. A lot of those kind of bands that we associate with the stoner movement have that quality to them. I mean, Clutch certainly, Acid Bath, Wofat from, if you're from Texas, right? Texas is a contention, right? I've called like ZZ Top and like Point Blank Southern rock bands for years and years. And there are a lot of people who are like, Texas isn't quite down south. It's not Southern enough. I don't know. I mean, it's right there. I mean, and if you listen to a lot of the qualities of the music, right? Bands like Black Horse, right? With a lot of these just like heavy blues rock bands, right? But
remember Bobby Barth and Axe. Remember how cool they were? The third and fourth album, right? Offering and Nemesis. Wow, those are great albums. They had some excitement going to them too. They were on the radio a little bit, those guys.
Yeah.
Love Axe.
And another band I do want to mention, because they are, again, they're from Texas as well, but their music, if you were to if there was a dictionary where you would look up Southern Fried Metal, the one band that always gets mentioned is Texas Hippie Coalition, who are, all about the big riffs, and they got the slide guitars and the raunchy vocals. And they're basically, I think they've always wanted to be that Southern fried metal band, because there's some bands that's what they want to do. We play Southern metal, and that's what it's all about. So there's so many other ones, and I think we kind of hit upon most of them here, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
Any last words,
I'll just
Martin?
mention one other thing: the beards. Right. I always think of that classic Bugs Bunny one. I call it beard pulling music because of that one where Bugs is playing the fiddle and those two guys are dancing around. He's making them beat each other up with the this square dance song that he's doing. Right.
Yeah,
Pulling
yeah,
the beards and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
yeah. Beards are pretty prevalent. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's for sure. So, Martin, what's going on with the Contrarian? Any new exciting episodes of the Contrarians or the podcast, the new books, all that sort of thing? What's happening on your end?
Yeah, Contrarians. We've got Grant Arthur involved now, and he's doing a great job. And he's got us doing these little shorts. So we've been doing this like new wave of British heavy metal minute, doing these odd little videos under 60 seconds, seeing how they do, what people think of them. But yeah, the books are all at martinpopoff.com, and I'm up to 201 on the. Don't know what the episode is going to be, but the next audio podcast of History in 5 Songs might do it on ballads. I'm not sure. How to make a good ballad that we all like and don't hate, and that'll get into male, female, all that sort of thing, what different people want from ballads, kind of thing. So I might do that one next. But yeah,
People do like ballads, right? So why not? Why not? Martin, how's your stock doing on this book right here?
Oh yeah, got more of those in. That's the brand new 50 career highlights of AC/DC. Beautiful, beautiful layout of the whole thing, as well as as that company always does.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the latest one, and I definitely have them. And martinpopoff.com, I'll sign them, ship them out, PayPal's, all that stuff.
Cool. For those watching, I hope to be getting to this over the weekend, so you'll hopefully get a review from me next week. So, and I'll be showing you a little more of the inside of this book. So if you're at all intrigued, whether you want to wait for me to do the review or not, head over to martinpopoff.com and grab your copy before they're all gone. So these books, they do a fantastic job on these books. I mean, these are just absolutely beautiful, and you do a fine job laying it all out and everything. So good stuff, my friend. All right, so coming up here on the channel tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we've got the monthly edition of 4 Fusion Friday, where Eric Porter, George Lemie, and myself, along with Mike Jacobs, our guest, will be talking about 4 pretty cool fusion albums from Germany. We're doing our first kind of like geographical themed show, so that's happening tonight. We've got tomorrow the UK Connection, where, speaking of Southern bands or Texas bands, Steve, Simon, and I will be ranking the songs on a classic album. That classic album is ZZ Top's Eliminator. That's coming up tomorrow. And then more Southern stuff. I will be ranking the albums of Derek Trucks Band on Sunday. So see that, Martin?
Nice.
Didn't even know it. This episode basically set up the theme for the entire weekend here on the channel, just like that, right?
And I interviewed Billy Gibbons last week.
That's right, you did. That's right, man. See this? I'm telling you. Well, what was it like talking to him?
Oh, he was great. It was the longest time I've ever had with him, and he was fine. He wanted to kind of keep going. He was liking the questions, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, he's pretty challenging though, because he's got that really big Southern drawl on him, right? And he has a really dressy way of putting his sentences together, kind of this formal way of talking, right? So yeah, he's great though. Yeah.
Cool. And speaking of interviews, I'm also interviewing Ross Jennings from the band Haken this weekend. They've got, for those of you here on the East Coast in the New York area, they're playing a pretty high-profile New York City show, I think early, mid next week. So I'll be talking to him on Sunday to get some information from him on how the tour is going, what he's looking forward to about the New York show, and we'll be talking about the new Haken album as well. So that's coming up this weekend also. So there you have it, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Tune in next Friday for Martin and myself here at the Funhouse. Until then, have a good weekend, everybody. And for Martin Popoff, I'm Pete Pardo. Enjoy. Thanks for watching.